Here we go. So here we are for, what did we say? This is live stream number 14. We're going to be talking about meeting cultures and co-ops, I guess is our thing. I'm Josh, as you can see from my name. Here with Abe and Chris, all three members of the GEO collective. And yeah, Abe, this topic today was your suggestion. So you want to start us off? And
yeah, sure.
your thoughts?
I just was. It's been on my mind lately, thinking about the kind of cultures around the meetings, our meetings when we gather, and how that affects the culture of the organization or the co-op, and affects how we make decisions. I mean, there's definitely some meetings I've attended which were dry and boring and just like, let's get on to business. Some that were that and ineffective at the same time, which was really hard to take. And then there's some that were like very woo-woo and ceremonial, and some that were very, contemplative. I mean, I'm a Quaker, so we have meetings that are very reverential, I guess, and contemplative, very quiet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As I was thinking about this, because I've been in a lot of different situations, a lot of different types of meetings with different types of people, very different meeting cultures, everything from, okay, so to start out, we're going to all stand in a circle and hold hands and sing this song together, right, at the permaculture convergence or something like that, versus, we're starting no later than 2 minutes after the hour. And, here's the agenda and we're sticking to it. And we're using Robert's Rules of Order. And, I have my preferences for meeting styles, which would definitely be in between those two extremes. But I think really the most important thing is just being cognizant of it. And, it's having a culture, a meeting culture, as it were, is kind of like having an accent. You don't necessarily recognize your own. If it's just what you're used to, you don't recognize it as a particular, accent. You don't. So if, you may just think, oh, this is just the way you do meetings. But so, the other people in your group may be coming with very different ideas about that. So I think personally, the most important thing is just being very upfront and cognizant about it, talking about it, not just assuming everybody's got the same culture, and talking about like, okay, so how uptight about being like super punctuality are people, are people going to get upset if we start 10 minutes late? Is everybody, or is everybody fine, waiting, 10, 15, 20 minutes until, for the meeting to start, or even longer? When I was in Nepal, the meeting culture there is if the meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. in the morning, people will show up between like 11 and noon. And that's normal. Nobody, and for me, the first time I was there and like, we schedule a meeting and an hour after the meeting was supposed to start, there's like 2 people there and there's supposed to be 100. I'm like, and they're like, don't worry. And everybody shows up. But just, being upfront about it. What that is, what you want your culture to be, I guess.
Chris, do you have some background to this? Any thoughts about this from your experience?
Well, can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yep.
I was thinking about this. I never read this article, but there's an article that I saw like in Spanish and I wanted to read it, but I lost it. But the title itself just kind of reminded me of a few things. But it's called the misery of self-management, or like the management of self-management of misery. And so I was just kind of thinking, it just got me thinking about how some meetings are just like kind of miserable, and sometimes they have nothing really to do with you, and kind of takes a while for you to figure that out. Um, but I was just thinking about like this idea of like what kind of things are being managed in meetings that kind of might go over the head, or sometimes we don't think about. And I was thinking about how a lot of times I feel like a lot of meetings, for better or for worse, I feel like something that's going on in meetings a lot of times is management of or suppression of play and curiosity. I don't know. Do y'all kind of see that happening in meetings? I don't know if that is good or bad, but that's one thing I noticed across from different types of meetings, how they vary. Um, and to me, I've always kind of wondered, like what if it's causing like obstructions when that kind of play and curiosity is suppressed, whether it's like before or after the meeting. Because I know sometimes some people can't quite like get involved or really kind of focus on something until they kind of get something out, whether it's like a curiosity. Um, I don't know. But I don't know, that was just something that I was thinking about, and I think it's a factor that's probably more important when the meeting is kind of short, like an hour. Well, that's super short, in my opinion, like an hour, 2 hours. It's nice when I see meetings that are basically like a 8 hour thing, 10 hour thing. Um, though that's different kind of way of looking at some of this stuff, but
Well, I mean, there's a perfect example of very different ideas about meeting culture, right? I mean, I don't think, Chris, I don't know that I've ever heard somebody say what you just said. I wish our meetings were 8 hours long, because I think that's what I just heard you say, essentially. And that doesn't seem to be a common sentiment, but obviously, like, those meetings would look very, very different than our hour and a half, kind of standard, right?
Yeah. I think just saying the word meeting like brings up rolled eyes for a lot of people. Like it's not something that a lot of people feel excited about. And I think just asking the question to a group like, what can we do to make our meetings, enjoyable, is a good way to start. And I rarely hear that question even being asked because the assumption is just, well, let's just get through this meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's enjoyable is going to differ for people, right? I mean,
exactly.
again, with like the punctuality thing, I remember it turned into kind of an issue at the Unitarian Fellowship that I used to be a member of, where there were some people who were very like, I have other things I have to get to today. I've got like, my 3 kids and 2 jobs, and I can't, have this kind of, I need to be able to schedule. The rest of my life is regimented. This has to be too. And then other people who were very much, wanted to take a more relaxed approach. And, it wasn't that anybody was right or wrong. It was just like, we have to choose a way to do it, and it's going to work better for some people than for others.
Right.
But again, it's like, it matters who the people are, right? Like, and what you're trying to accomplish. There's not going to be one right answer.
Right. Going to Quaker meetings, one thing I do like about the, sitting in silence part to it is that it gets you out of your head about things going on in your day-to-day life, and it gets you in the framework, in the frame of mind to think about, okay, I'm in this space for the benefit of this group now. Like you're changing, like it's like the silence is basically meditative. Like we believe, like to make godly decisions, we are a discerning spirit, right? So we're trying to kind of tap it for, theists, Quakers that believe in God, that they, we're trying to tap into this spirit, to make better decisions. So there's a kind of, it changes the spirit in which you're in that meeting, So I do like that. The thing I do miss is like more celebration. Quakers don't have music in our meetings for worship or business meetings, right? And I grew up Catholic with parents who were choir directors, right? And so, I mean, we believe that the Quakers believe that meetings are meetings for worship, even if they're business meetings, right? But I've also been to business meetings outside of the spiritual realm that did have that kind of music, right? And I like that with conditions. Like I like music that can bring people together, but I am not the pep rally kind of person. Like I'm not like, let's just all be happy, even if we're not feeling happy, kind of, positivity kind of culture. But yeah, I've liked meetings that have had some bit of music, as long as I could get into it.
Yeah. I mean, well, so what you're saying, yeah, with the music, and that makes me think of the same thing that when Chris was talking about, exploring some more playful aspects or curiosity, stuff like that. Like, again, to me, it really depends on the people and what they're comfortable with. Because I've like one example, there's an old warehouse that got purchased by a local kind of very lefty philanthropist, who just had happened to inherit, a couple of $1 million, and so had enough money to buy this big old building, and wanted to, make it a community space, and was trying to organize people cooperatively to do that. And when I started going to the meetings, she was very into like, play and all this stuff, and not, about fussy meeting etiquette and stuff like that. So every meeting would start off with a game, some kind of like icebreaker game. But often it would be like one or then two or three. And frankly, I got very quickly annoyed with the icebreaker games, because I didn't show up to like toss a beanbag to you and ask you what your favorite food is or something. Like, I'm not 6 years old. What the hell am I doing here? Right?
Right.
Like, I came to have a meeting. I'm an adult. Like, and so now, not to say that what she was doing was wrong or bad, but I was not like the type of person like that. To me was a complete turn off. Like, I don't want that. Like, but on the other hand, our GEO meetings, our monthly meetings, as you can all attest to, our check-ins at the beginning of our GEO meetings, which are just like, item one on an agenda with 15 things, item one check-ins, will take us half an hour to 45 minutes of just people talking, everybody going around talking about what's been going on in their life, how they're doing. And that's a huge part of our meetings for us. And so, I think for me, that serves that same kind of, purpose of like making it not a stuffy meeting, and, really helping people get to know each other, but in a way that works for me. But other people I know have showed up at our meetings are just like, what the hell was that about? They were not into it at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, our check-ins can be like half our meetings often.
Easily.
Yeah. And I love it. I mean, I like y'all.
The people who stick around are obviously, right, the people who like that type of meeting culture that we have, which is a very particular variety that we that we have. So,
well, that kind of reminds me too, and I don't know if we're stepping into it, but I do think that there are meetings where, and it's a lot of times probably person specific. Sometimes it's group specific, where like the point of meeting is to be with each other. Like, that's a big part of it, not to do the stuff that we're talking about. And I think that I think that's a dynamic that I see across different groups, and maybe that's why kind of like one situation we're getting to know each other with play or whatever, it's okay. But in the other situation, it's not okay because maybe we're not really trying to connect with those people. And like I've been to some meetings this last week, and I wasn't trying to connect with those people. And I know that's like just plain bad things that we should just stay away from, right? Because I feel like that maybe that's the alienation that we're supposed to be pulling away from, and we're just like engaging in it. I don't know. But hey, when you're talking about the moment of silence, it got me thinking about this one. It wasn't quite a meeting, but it was definitely a get together. And part of the get together was we had to basically do something like that. And then it was optional, I think, if we wanted to share like what came to mind. But I think particularly what we were supposed to lean into was like, what are we worrying about? What do we feel in our body and all that? And and then and then when I was thinking about it, I was like, damn, I'm kind of dealing with a lot of stuff right now. And just got me thinking about like some of the stuff that other people have mentioned and that get together, what they're going through. And I really liked it because it made me feel like way more compassionate about everybody in the room. And I feel like a lot of times like business meetings get in the way of generating that compassion and empathy with people when it's just like business. And why sometimes I really like get-togethers that are like not meetings, where there's like no structure, because inevitably I feel like what a lot of people do is they start talking to you about the heavy stuff that they're going through that's inappropriate in a meeting. A lot of times like the meeting's not really about that, especially if there's like, even if like the meeting, like you're not going to get in trouble if you mention it, there is that pressure like, okay, we got to get this business done. And yeah, I really like it. There has to be this like good faith um and compassion, I think. And a lot of times you're really missing out on that when you're not hearing about the struggles that people are going through. You would have never guessed. Like I had a friend, and she was like, I was in a car accident. It's like we didn't even know, and like what. And thank goodness we had this unstructured space where we were able to share that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, the last part there is a kind of requirement for me in meetings. Like if we're going to do that kind of somatic, kind of inward contemplation thing at the beginning of meeting, it has to go somewhere, right? Like the meeting has to be able to receive what people are dealing with. I've gone to some meetings, particularly Zoom meetings, where like we are thinking about what's going on inside ourselves, and then we don't talk about it. And I'm like, and I'm thinking to myself, well, you just opened me up to some deep sadness, and now we're on to business. Like
have you seen Always Sunny in Philadelphia where they unpack Frank? The therapist unpacks him. He said, "You open me up like a suitcase." I think he said, "You open me up like a suitcase. It's all coming out."
Yeah,
but yeah, I've been in a scenario too where that happened, and people got mad because they're like, "Yo, we were supposed to like, I didn't know this was gonna happen." We started talking about all this heavy stuff, and then we didn't get resolution, and it caused a lot of this.
Yeah. I mean,
I think
I think a lot of that it can backfire like that too. I mean, it's like, oh, okay, let's all, you talk about what's going on with you. If you ask people to, start with something personal about themselves in a meeting, yeah, you better, be able to deal with it. What you're gonna get, because a lot of people, again, they're not necessarily coming to that meeting to talk about the community, park project or whatever it is, or whatever, your Food Not Bombs or whatever thing you're organizing, to talk about their like emotional well-being with these strangers, right? Who it's like maybe not the right people to be talking about like all the stuff that you're going through right now. That might not be the right way to start the meeting. Depending on what you're doing. But that's why I think, as Chris, you were saying, that the importance of having socializing time out, that's not focused on business, that's unstructured. That's something I think we did well, or the folks did well that started worker co-op in Missoula, especially at the beginning when before a lot of other stuff got in the way and we were more focused on really maintaining the values and keeping it fun. We actually like designated somebody as the CFO, the chief fun officer, who, a couple times a month would get everybody together and we'd go down to the Union Club and play pool and have a couple of pitchers, and it was have a good time and just socialize. And it's a good thing to do. And with GEO, we haven't done this since the pandemic, but I think we're probably going to start up again soon. We'd always get together in person, even though we're a group of people that's distributed all over the country. Make it a point to try to get at least, as many people as can get together in person for a weekend to get together. And yeah, it makes a huge difference. You bond with people so much more and differently when you're just hanging out, making breakfast together or whatever. Then,
yeah, I've gone to Eco Village meetings where it started with a potluck. Like you just you start with the gathering, you eat meal together, you catch up, you chat, and then there's a kind of ringing of the bell or whatever that signifies that the meeting's going to start, and you get all gathered for that. I think that's nice because you do get to. It is not the same as check-ins, but it has some of the same functions of being able to just get out what's been going on for you to the group. I also one of the best. This is more on less on the beginning side of the meeting, but in the middle of it. One of the best meetings I've ever attended was at the intensive community Shannon Farms in Virginia back in 2003, I guess. They had just gone through a consensus training with C.T. Butler, and they were excited about what they had learned as a group, So they were like looking forward to kind of, to doing all these things that they learned in the meetings, right? They were talking about how their meetings used to be awful and now how great they are. So people were actually excited about the meetings, which was a nice energy to come into and see, And every discussion item had a different facilitation tool, like they would do. The facilitator would say, okay, for this one, we're doing popcorn. Like just raise your hand if you have something to say here. And then the next one would be, okay, we're doing rounds now. Everyone, one by one, do that. Next one, we're doing fishbowl. And the fishbowl was a fun one. That one felt like a game where people had like, there was the outer circle of chairs and then there was the inner circle of like 5 chairs. And people would just get up and sit in the middle, to when they wanted to talk. But you could only have 5 people talking at a time because they're in that inner circle, right? And then when you're done talking, you leave that seat so someone else can take that seat. So instead of having like 40 people talking all at once, you have 5 people having a discussion in the center. But those members of those 5 group, but it was 5 at a time, but it was all those larger group people coming into the center at different points. You know what I mean? But and then there was like small group breakouts, which would come back to the larger group. The meeting ended up being very like dynamic in terms of just movement. Like you weren't just sitting in one chair the whole meeting. And it was a nice meeting. People were very engaged with that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, the importance of good facilitation, and then having all those different tools at your disposal, which kind of brings up for me sociocracy, which is what we technically we say that we practice in GEO. kind of pseudo practice it, I think, like a lot of people, but it does have a lot of those good tools to use. And on our website, we have an entire like issue devoted to sociocracy. And Abe, while I know you're more of a consensus than sociocracy guy, it is like I said, it's got a lot of good tools. So, and they have a meeting format, like a layout that I really like. And even though, you can look at it, it seems very formal as to how you're going to do things, because it's centered around speaking in rounds, making sure that everybody's got space, and that it, and it's very thought out in terms of how you actually go about making a decision, first thinking about what the actual scope of the problem is, what kind of things we need to take into consideration, and then forming a proposal as a group. In meetings where we've stuck to those more, like I really like that flow. And even though it can seem more structured, because it's not like a Robert's Rules of Order type of structure where, you have to say this particular thing and at this particular time, it feels very organic to me, even though it can look a little bit contrived if you're just looking at their meeting schematic, but I personally am a fan of that, and definitely a fan of talking in rounds, like right now, for instance. I think it's Chris's turn.
I was thinking about I like meetings where you don't really have to take notes, or where the notes are like 3 to 5 sentences or less. I love that. I hate taking notes. I noticed that a lot of collaborations in my life, we don't even use notes, and it's how we survive. But I know that notes a lot of times are necessary, or minutes are necessary. But I really enjoy those meetings or work sessions. If you plan it to where you don't quite have to have a meeting, you can have a work session where you're still kicking ideas around. I love when we don't have to take notes. That right.
That's funny, Chris, because when you and I have meetings, it seems like you're always the one taking notes. Although they are kind of working meetings too.
Yeah, those aren't so bad, but if it would be cool. I was hoping that by this time AI would make note taking irrelevant if I'm going to be dealing with the computers, but that hasn't happened yet. I think I don't know if that'll ever happen. And then
I mean, for me, I also am not a huge fan of being the one who has to take notes, but I really do appreciate it when there are good notes being taken at a meeting, because after the meeting, I almost never remember everything that we talked about and everything that I said I would do. And so being able to go back and look and oh, that's the thing that I was supposed to have done that I said I would do, before the next meeting, and get on it is very much appreciated. But yeah, it can also be, something that's feels like, a bit much of a formality. And then it's also can make people, I don't know, maybe reticent to say some things or have discussions if they, it's being written down and notarized. So depends on the situation.
Just on your comment about me being more of a consensus guy, I just want to be clear. I'm not against sociocracy. I just have some aversion to sociocracy as kind of a rebranding of consensus, and that it doesn't kind of acknowledge its consensus roots. It kind of tries to differentiate itself from consensus and say it's not consensus when it ends up being the consensus, Yeah. But I also like the idea of when you're doing consensus, you can kind of pull different tools from the toolbox rather than this is the way that we do it. And I think sociocracy tends to be, I guess, sociocracy groups tend to start with a high structure start and then pull back some structure, and consensus groups tend to be low structure and then add in the structure later on when they realize that no structure, doesn't really help. So, so that I just wanted to make that note. But yeah.
And this brings us, to a kind of fundamental question, I think, in meeting cultures and just co-op culture in general, which is the consensus or consent versus voting, majority vote. And of course, the standard in our society and for, most traditional businesses is a majority vote. And a lot of, especially smaller co-ops, tend to be more into the consensus and consent based decision making. But that is certainly a cultural issue. Again, like any issue of values, I think is always worth getting very clear about with the people that you're working with, because you can assume, like, it just seems natural to you that, like, well, of course we would be trying to get to consensus, and that might not seem at all natural to somebody else. And it's like we go with majority vote. That's how you make decisions. And again, personally, I don't think there's any one particular correct way that's correct all the time. But yeah.
One thing that I do appreciate on consent-based decision-making, consensus, sociocracy, all that, over the Robert's Rules of Order or majority rules, is one cultural thing I have noticed kind of as a result of the structure of majority rules is that it can create campaigning, like people talking, sometimes before the meeting, like just trying to, well, if you vote for this, I'll vote for this kind of thing. And so then it becomes more literally a popularity contest, kind of thing, rather than Quakers would say discernment process, of seeing what people's values and needs are at the base of that decision-making process,
Yeah. The Robert's Rules of Order, you're definitely asking for a whole lot of politicking to go on when you do that. If there's any, it's just kind of, it's almost built into the system that there's going to be this kind of outside of discussion. And I think it's good to try to keep that sort of thing to a minimum. It's not that you're not going to have that, that you couldn't have that sort of thing in a consensus-based group. And I've seen it myself. Definitely, had somebody in a supposedly sociocratic organization who was, trying to, before the meeting where they were going to bring up a conflict with somebody, go into the other members and try, and talking trash about the other member that they were going to have a conflict with, to try and get everybody on their side, like, in advance. And, felt just as gross and dirty as as any group that, that I've been involved with that's ever used Robert's Rules of Order. So, it's another thing, I think meeting culture is just going to be affected by, like, your culture. So even if you say, like, oh, we're going to do consent or consensus or sociocracy, that's not necessarily going to mean that the culture of your group is a particular thing.
Yeah, that makes me think of the worst meeting I've ever attended, and I am going to name names, but they would acknowledge, from people I've talked to, they would say, "Oh, you came in at a really bad time for our group." But Earth Haven Eco Village in 2003, also, that was part of one of the same trips I was on with Shannon Farm. They used consensus, but I think a lot of people would say they didn't use it properly. Like, So because they are an eco village, and basic kind of has the potential to create kind of like capitalism on a small scale, like situation where your neighbors are your customers or your employers or your landlords or your tenants,
Mm-hmm.
And so at this meeting, the facilitator of the meeting was also a woman who was the landlord to 5 other people in the group, and she was wielding the economic power that she had in this community, in this meeting, and preemptively saying, I'm going to block this proposal if you bring it forward. Like before any content was mentioned, like preemptively trying to block a decision, which is not how you do consensus, and it should not be coming from a facilitator, particularly. So it's really like, yeah, I mean, that was the worst situation I had ever seen. It became a whole fight. There was serious anger in that room. And it was not how you're supposed to do consensus, but it was messy.
Yeah, not how you're supposed to do consensus, not how you're supposed to do facilitation. I think not how you're supposed to do landlording either, really. That's just kind of messed up.
In Chicago, there's a new Chicago IWW branch. It's not referring to this one, but the one like prior to this, or one could say two branches prior to this, or they'll say they have nothing to do with each other, because the one I'm referring to is called Chicago GMB, and the current one is like Greater Chicago IWW. But in that one, yeah, the landlord of the branch was the treasurer, and there was that looming threat all the time, like, and they ended up getting expelled for embezzlement. So that's interesting though too. Yeah, right. How do the power structures of people outside the organization affect the organization within? Are there any? Yeah, that wasn't a co-op situation. But man, that's interesting that in that co-op situation, that there was a landlord like that.
Yeah, I mean, and that again, the example from the warehouse that kind of local lefty philanthropist had bought, like that turned out to be a huge issue with that group. And I think what killed it, one of the major things, besides the fact that it was a philanthropic project that was trying to be a co-op project, but not really, and so didn't get adequate buy-in from the community, because in the end, the decision making in the final analysis was actually all in this one philanthropist's hands. And but this is a person with considerable wealth, and so even though she's organizing with a lot of low-income people, like almost exclusively low-income people, and because of that, well, there's a real power dynamic there, and it's not just about discussing what we think this project should be and how to make it the best it can be, but trying to say what you think is going to make this philanthropist happy, so that maybe she throws you a job, or gives you a free place to live or something like that. And yeah, it's very poisoning to projects. That was a very frustrating project. The irony was that because she didn't actually have a very good like co-op culture, and didn't get buy-in from enough people to really make it work, she decided to sell the building. And once she did that, she just turned over control over everything to those of us who were still showing up at the meetings, and said, do whatever you want. At which point the place took off, and we started generating revenue, like way more than enough to cover the monthly nut on that building, almost instantly, from just ideas that we'd been kicking around on our own of what we could do with the place. But so it worked. Like we actually were able to make it work, but it took the person who owned the building stepping away and getting out of, removing themselves from that culture. But, you know, and it's like, okay, we ran it and it was sick for like 4 or 5 months, and then it got sold. And it was like, well, you know, next time we have an opportunity, we know that skating rinks are cool. If you can swing the insurance. But yeah, anyway, so
yeah. Starhawk in her book has a partly fictional story, you know.
Abe is in, like, coming to us from a printing press, an industrial printing press or something like that.
The noise in the background. Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the so she has this story about a co-housing community, which is like these older members that are, you know, professionals, fairly wealthy, living together, and they have their own living units, and then this other crowd comes into the community that are young and less money, but because of the dynamic culturally, it's a shock to the system of the community. And then it also creates this economic situation where the labor contributions that each member has to create, give to the community, starts getting kind of picked up by the people who with less money, and for money from the people with more money. So the people with more money, instead of contributing labor, pay the lower income people to do more labor for them. So it created this class system in the group. Really good book. That's an empowerment manual. But yeah, the kind of power dynamics within groups and different cultures within groups, and that, you know, is really interesting to me. I'd love to hear stories from you guys there. Even just the power dynamics of like who are the loud people in the group, you know, and have you been part of groups that have done like progressive facilitation of like calling on certain groups before other groups? Do you guys have any stories in that realm of things?
Well, power dynamics in groups. Yeah, I mean, mostly class-based. That has been the story of a lot of my organizing or attempts at organizing, especially when it has to do with like community, because we inevitably, it ends up being one of the people in the group has the land, right? And they're a landowner. They don't have enough resources on their own to develop their land in the way that they would like. They're community minded. They would like to live in a community with their friends and other cool people. And they generally like the idea of cooperation. And I've had this situation happen on more than one occasion. But because it's their land and it's been their land for a while, and they are, despite their best efforts, unable to let go of like any kind of real decision-making power over it, which makes the rest of us in the group just as like, well, we're no longer doing a cooperative project here. We're just here to help you do whatever you decide, you know, and we can offer ideas. And if you like them, then you'll let us like do them on your, you know, place. And so, and have not ever managed to figure out how to get somebody, a private landowner, to sell their land to a group of people. I think that would be the thing to do. You know, it's like, okay, if you own this land and we're going to build some kind of intentional community or whatever it is here, that us as a group need to get a loan and purchase it, you know, from you. But those groups have all fallen apart before it ever got to that point, because this is the other you know, problem with having these kind of differences in power dynamics. At some point, like if the person who owns the land just gets frustrated, it's like they've had, 2 frustrating meetings and they're just decided, all right, I'm done with it. Then it's like, okay, the whole thing is done now because like they were the one with the land.
That's where that saying, consensus only works if I get my way, comes comes into play.
Yeah, I mean, and so yeah, so this is what I think about meeting cultures, and I think kind of my major takeaway is to be really thoughtful about it, and to, as some people say, and this probably sound a little bad, I don't care. You want to be very thoughtful about keeping the wrong sort of people out of your group, right? If you don't want people who are going to show up in a suit and tie and demand that everybody be hyper professional, do a consensus process with 5 minutes of silence at the beginning of the meetings, and then everybody hold hands and sing a song. Like, you're not going to have, that will keep a certain type of person away, and vice versa. And I say it kind of, it's not, only halfway flippantly, because I think it's actually like, you need to, like, whatever way that you're structuring things, you're going to attract certain types of people, and you're going to drive off other types of people. There's no one thing that's going to be attractive to everybody. And so be really, thoughtful about it. And for me, one of the rules I've I'm come up with, is I'm very hesitant now to do organizing if there are that kind of class power dynamics in the group. And it's even when things have been, everything's always messy when you're organizing with people, but the messiness with other low income people, for me, way easier and better to deal with than the messiness that, coming with trying to organize with people who are like upper middle class, and especially this, philanthropist kind of millionaire class. It's like not worth the trouble. Chris?
And an interesting power thing that happened recently. So we're talking about. Some friends are talking about working with hackers, the possibility. And one of my friends is like straight up like, we can't consent to working with hackers. Like, there can't be that consent. I was like, you know what? Yeah, that's kind of, for me at least. I was like, yeah, I dealt with some hackers, and I don't want to be worrying about that stuff all the time. Especially we find out that they've been doing some stuff and we need to talk to them about it. Especially like with how nobody, a lot of people aren't really connected, can't really be accountability. Radical accountability in large part, I think, is a myth. In so many spaces, like, what happens? People just melt away when they get caught doing something. But Abe, I have seen that progressive stack. I've seen it before. It was like where it had this complex formula that include people who were folks of color, and man, I don't remember what happened in those meetings. I wish I had something interesting to report, but I don't. But I've seen it. And it seemed like it was going on for like 1 or 2 years in Chicago, but then I just kind of seen it disappear. Maybe because I'm mostly with groups that are just folks of color now.
Yeah.
But one thing that's probably more, I don't know if it's more relevant now with the rise of virtual meetings, which part of me, like, I like that, and then there's another part of me I don't like that, is the dynamics of like active participation and non-active participation, or maybe there's other ways to think about that. I don't get to talk about that enough, but I know that's a dynamic in meetings, and I kind of want to start clamping down on it too, and figuring out how to clamp down on it. Because I get tired of repeating myself. That's one thing. And yeah, I don't know if y'all come across that.
So when are you talking about, Chris, certain people on the Zoom call talking all the time and other people just not saying anything?
That's part of it. Cameras off. Cameras always off. And when you check in on them, it doesn't seem like they ever know what's going on.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I go back and forth on that. Like sometimes I don't want to have my camera on. I don't want to look at myself. I don't want to, like, it feels weird. Like even like right now, I'm like purposely trying to keep focused on the, Chris or Abe and not look at the picture of myself off to the side there. Um, so I, can totally understand the turning the camera
So
off, but then
self-loathing. Now we're dealing with self-loathing. Nah, just kidding.
no. um, but yeah, it can be easy to zone out, and there are definitely, I'm sure people who just turn off the camera so they can pretend that they're there while they're not actually paying attention. But you can also have the camera on and not be paying attention. I mean, I could be sitting here playing a chess game right now, and you would have no clue I'm still looking at the camera. So I would look very interested in what you're saying. So yeah. But I'll mention again sociocracy, and we do have this the sociocracy / dynamic governance right on our front page. If you scroll down, there's a link to a whole bunch of articles on that, and they have a lot of good tools specifically for making sure that everybody is getting space to speak and given that opportunity, and in a really way that's thoughtful about making as many people comfortable expressing themselves and sharing as possible. Because it's definitely an issue. Like I, for instance, will just talk all the time, given the opportunity, like right now.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you were saying a few minutes ago, Josh, about the right people in the group kind of conversation. And then I was thinking about that with the progressive stacking thing too, about basically the concept of inclusion, right? Like, I don't know, if I was to have a meal with a bunch of different diets of the people coming to the meal, I probably would listen. I probably wouldn't serve meat to everyone. Like when everyone doesn't, like, I would probably try to figure out what works for everyone. And sometimes when you have different cultures within the group and different identities within the group, you have to kind of side on what's going to be most inclusive for the most people, right? And I was thinking about this one thing that Diane Leaf Christian said, Diane Leaf Christian from Earth Haven Eco Village. And I didn't fully agree with how she put it, but it was interesting. It was provocative. She said, like, in your intentional community, when you're starting a community, you have to think about diversity, but you have to think of, like, how much diversity do you want? And I think she was trying to get what you were saying about, like, people that think about people you want and people you don't want. But some of those things are can end up being unconsciously exclusive in not healthy ways, like in terms of the inclusivity issue, right? Mm-hmm. Like, let's say this is not a meeting culture, but it's a community culture issue. Like, I've gone to some intentional communities with some Black friends of mine, and they see this white community, and they're like, oh, this is not for me, and here's why. This is a dirty farm, and this is how they respond to talking about issues about race, right? And they have all these. They have very specific lists of why they didn't feel it was inclusive. And then if you talk to someone from that same community, they'll just say, "Oh, we're welcoming of diversity." I think it's I do think you have to think about what you do want and what you don't want, but you have to be really careful on that inclusivity matter, especially if you have multiple cultures within your meeting culture,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and being realistic, right? I mean, to me, that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is like being realistic, that you can't please everybody, and it's not possible to be inclusive in the totalizing sense, like that literally anybody would feel included. Like I don't think that's a goal that you can achieve. And so, saying, if you are really serious about wanting to have, more people from a different ethnic background than the ones who are making up your group right now, then you would need to be serious about asking people from that other ethnic background, what is it that would make you feel more comfortable, or make you feel included, or would allow you to be part of the group, and all that stuff, and not just saying, of course, oh yes, we're welcoming, nobody here is wearing a white hood, so it's cool, right? Like um, uh, but it reminds me of something that David Diogarte wrote in who is with the Los Indias intentional community / worker co-op, and he wrote an article, and he was saying that he found the American ideas about diversity rather strange, and that it seemed like to him that most groups in America were trying to have diversity within every single group. And to him, that didn't make any sense, because it's just easier to organize with people who are similar, among people who have, similar backgrounds and stuff like that, and similar worldviews. And he said, in their view, in Los Indias, which was a intentional community mainly made up of Spanish women, South American women, with like, it's like 5 women and 3 guys or something like that, from Spain and South America. And he said, in their view, you want diversity. You need diversity in your networks. You don't need diversity within every single group. It's fine if you have a group that's just all white guys, and a group that's all black women, and a group that's all, uh, whatever, Hispanic Catholics or something. Like that's like, you have to, like, that's only that. But as long as everybody is networking together, that's fine, right? I mean, and then it's like, so everybody has their own power base. And it reminds me, I guess, of like during, like, in the 60s, 70s, with the Black Panthers and the Latin Kings and the Young Patriots, and that it wasn't that the Black Panthers or the Young Patriots were trying to become interracial or multiracial, but they were all networked together, right? So I don't know. It's a different view of diversity than I think we have, and I think one that it kind of resonated with me. Just, it's like, I would much rather be organizing with a group of other low income rural people, and then networked with folks who have a different class and geographic background than we do, rather maybe than everybody just try to be in the same group and figure out all of your cultural differences. It's like that's a
Yeah, I'm
large order.
unapologetic about I'm not about not being interested in pleasing everybody. Um, have a lot of meeting spaces where the culture is anti-governmental, no law enforcement allowed. Um, if you participated in the armed forces, we're gonna analyze that. Um, yeah, I love that. I feel like I can't. If there's a cop in the meeting, I usually just walk out. If I find I'm like, I don't just. I'm not gonna get into that, but yeah, and I feel like the culture is unsafe when there's like groups or whatever, and the people have not been vetted. And we don't know if someone's law enforcement or not. I haven't even asked the question. Um, mhm. Yeah, but yeah, I'm personally not interested in yeah, like just having anyone trying to like fill quotas of having certain people. There's a lot of groups where I'm not interested. We're not interested in that, because then it just doesn't work out. It's kind of like trusting friends, getting people in, trusting neighbors, their recommendations of who to bring in for certain efforts. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's fun. It's interesting to hear people like wanting the diversity and stuff, and and like try as they might, like I will never go into that thing. No matter how diverse they want to be, I'm not gonna go into that thing. It will never please me.
Yeah.
That whole group, whatever it's about, I'm not interested in that.
Well, I mean, to me, it often feels like it's groups that just like look at themselves and say, "Oh, we all kind of look similar. We wish we didn't. We wish like our board of directors page had some more color on it, and so it wasn't all just a bunch of pasty white people." And they, but they don't want to change anything. Right? It's like we want to be exactly the same as we are, but we just also want to be able to say that we're a diverse group. And it's like, and I think that's that's where it becomes like the box ticking kind of thing, and it gets kind of
Keep me away from that.
Yeah.
It's easier to fall into that when you're not a collective and have a board of directors, and the board of directors needs to be representative of your membership body.
Yeah.
I gotta take off, but thanks for holding the space.
Yeah. Well, it's right at an hour, so we should probably wrap her up and say we will see you all again on the second Monday of May, which is the 13th, and we'll be back. Thanks all.
See ya.